"Your sick kid is ruining our neighborhood," Karen said meanly to my 8-year-old daughter Sophie, who had cancer. She made my sick child clean her office every day after hospital treatment. Karen didn't know I was a judge who would punish her later. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. My name is Sarah Mitchell and I'm a federal judge. But 3 months ago, I was just a desperate mother watching my 8-year-old daughter Sophie suffer from leukemia. What happened next still makes my blood boil, but it also taught me that justice comes in many forms, and sometimes it arrives when people least expect it. We moved to Willowbrook Heights after Sophie's diagnosis. The doctors said clean air and a peaceful environment would help her recovery process. The neighborhood seemed absolutely perfect with its tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes and friendly atmosphere. The houses were beautiful, the lawns perfectly manicured, and the community appeared welcoming from the outside. But appearances can be deceiving, and I learned this the hard way when I met Karen Henderson, our ruthless HOA president who ruled the neighborhood like a tyrant. Karen was a tall, sharp-faced woman in her 50s who treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. She had piercing blue eyes that seemed to judge everything and everyone around her with contempt. Her perfectly styled gray hair never had a strand out of place, and she wore expensive designer clothes that screamed superiority and entitlement. From the very moment we moved into our new home, she made it crystal clear that sick children were inconvenient for property values and unwelcome in her perfect community. Sophie was my entire world. At 8 years old, she was going through intensive chemotherapy treatments that left her completely exhausted and weak. Some days she felt okay and would try to play quietly in our small backyard, drawing pictures with her crayons. Other days she could barely get out of bed without help. Her beautiful auburn hair had fallen out completely during treatment, and she wore colorful scarves that I let her pick out herself from the Children's Hospital gift shop. Despite everything she was going through, she still had the brightest smile that could light up any room and warm the coldest heart. The trouble started on a Tuesday morning when Sophie was having one of her better days. She was sitting on our front porch, slowly sipping apple juice through a straw and watching birds in the trees when she accidentally dropped the juice box. It rolled down our driveway and stopped near Karen's perfect flower bed that she obsessed over daily. Before I could even get up to retrieve it, Karen came storming out of her house like a woman possessed by pure rage. "Your brat is destroying our neighborhood's image," Karen sneered at me, her voice filled with pure disgust and hatred. "Look at her, bald and sickly looking. She's bringing down everyone's mood and our property values significantly. People don't want to see sick children when they're trying to enjoy their expensive homes and peaceful environment." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces hearing those incredibly cruel words about my precious daughter. Sophie heard every single word, and I watched as tears filled her innocent brown eyes. She quickly pulled her colorful scarf tighter around her head and ran inside the house, sobbing quietly. I wanted to scream at Karen to tell her exactly what I thought of her heartless comments, but I needed to comfort my daughter first. "Don't listen to her, sweetheart," I whispered to Sophie as I held her trembling body close. "You are the most beautiful, brave girl in the entire world. That woman doesn't know what she's talking about. She has a very sick heart." But Sophie looked up at me with those wise eyes that had seen too much pain for someone so young. "Mommy, am I really ugly now? Is that why she doesn't like me? Did I do something wrong to make her angry?" I cried silently that night after Sophie fell asleep. How could anyone be so cruel to an innocent child fighting for her life? But I had no idea that Karen's cruelty was just beginning, and much worse was yet to come. 2 weeks later, Karen knocked on our door with a clipboard and a wicked smile that made my stomach turn with dread. She was dressed in her usual expensive outfit, looking like she was about to deliver the most important news in the world. "I've reviewed the HOA bylaws very carefully," she announced with fake authority and obvious satisfaction. "Any family causing disruptions to neighborhood harmony must provide mandatory community service hours. Your daughter will clean my home office every single day after her medical treatments. She's 8 years old and fighting cancer." I protested, my voice rising with complete disbelief. "How can you possibly expect a sick child to clean your office? This is absolutely insane." "The rules apply to everyone without exception," Karen replied coldly, tapping her perfectly manicured nails on the clipboard. "Age and medical conditions are completely irrelevant factors. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to pay the $500 daily fine for non-compliance with HOA regulations." I felt the world spinning around me violently. $500 every single day? My savings were already completely drained from Sophie's medical bills, specialist visits, experimental treatments, and medications that insurance wouldn't cover. I was barely managing to pay our basic expenses like food and utilities, and now this monster was demanding impossible choices from our struggling family. With a heavy heart and absolutely no other options available, I had to agree to Karen's cruel and unreasonable demands. Every single day after Sophie's exhausting chemotherapy sessions at the hospital, she would drag her weak little body to Karen's pristine home office. The room was unnecessarily large and filled with expensive furniture that Karen seemed to dirty on purpose just to create more work. Karen would make Sophie scrub floors on her hands and knees, dust every shelf and surface multiple times, organize countless papers that didn't need organizing, and clean windows until they sparkled perfectly. Sophie never complained, not even once. She would come home with her hands red and raw from harsh cleaning chemicals, her back aching from constant bending over, and complete exhaustion written all over her pale face. But she never said a single negative word about Karen or the unfair situation we were trapped in. "Mommy, why is Mrs. Karen so mean to me?" Sophie asked one evening as I applied healing cream to chemical burns on her small hands. Did I do something really bad to make her so angry at me? I held her close, my own tears falling onto her colorful scarf. "Some people have forgotten how to be kind, sweetheart. It's not your fault at all. You've done absolutely nothing wrong. Some adults just have very sick hearts and no compassion. Maybe if I clean better and work harder, she'll start liking me," Sophie said hopefully, breaking my heart completely. That innocent comment destroyed me emotionally. My beautiful daughter was blaming herself for an adult's inexcusable cruelty and heartlessness. The days continued like this for weeks. Sophie would finish her chemo treatments, feeling nauseated and weak, then drag herself to Karen's house to clean. I watched my daughter grow thinner and more fragile with each passing day. The combination of cancer treatment and forced labor was destroying her small body. Karen seemed to enjoy Sophie's suffering. She would stand over her, criticizing every movement, demanding that floors be cleaned again if they weren't perfect. Sometimes she would deliberately spill things just to watch Sophie clean them up on her hands and knees. "Work faster," Karen would snap. "Other children your age can clean properly. Maybe you're just lazy." I started recording these sessions secretly, documenting every cruel word and heartless action. Something deep inside me knew that one day Karen would pay for her cruelty. The absolute worst day came during Sophie's birthday week. She had just finished a particularly harsh chemotherapy session that left her violently ill and completely drained. She was throwing up every few minutes and could barely stand without swaying dangerously. Her temperature was elevated, and the doctors had warned me to watch carefully for signs of serious complications. When I called Karen to explain that Sophie was too sick to clean that day, Karen's response was absolutely heartless and shocking. "I don't care if she's dying," Karen snapped through the phone with pure venom. "She has obligations and commitments to this community that must be met. Bring her over immediately, or I'm calling the police to report trespassing violations and filing additional hefty fines." "She can barely stand up," I pleaded desperately, my voice breaking. "Please, just this once, show some basic human compassion. She's just a little girl celebrating her birthday." "Weakness is not an acceptable excuse," Karen replied coldly before hanging up abruptly. With absolutely no choice in the matter, I helped Sophie walk slowly to Karen's house. When we arrived, Karen was waiting with her arms crossed and a look of pure disgust on her face. "You're 10 minutes late," she announced with satisfaction. "That's an additional $50 penalty that will be added to your account." I watched in complete horror as my sick daughter tried desperately to clean Karen's office while fighting constant waves of nausea. Sophie collapsed twice during the cleaning, and each time Karen would stand over her like a predator, yelling about lazy excuses and worthless children. I wanted to grab Sophie and run away, but Karen threatened to call the police if we left early. "Get up!" Karen screamed when Sophie fell the second time. "Stop being so dramatic. Other children work harder than this without complaining." After 2 torturous hours, I found Sophie collapsed on Karen's office floor, too weak to continue cleaning. Karen stood over her like a vulture, her face twisted with anger and complete disgust. "This is completely unacceptable," Karen shouted at my unconscious daughter. "I've had enough of this pathetic display of weakness." Then Karen made her biggest mistake. Looking down at my unconscious daughter with pure hatred, she said the words that would ultimately seal her fate forever. "Maybe if this worthless brat just died already, we'd all be better off. She's nothing but a burden on society and a waste of resources. This neighborhood would be so much better without sick freaks like her." What Karen didn't know was that I had started secretly recording our conversations weeks earlier on my phone. Every cruel word, every heartless demand, Every moment of systematic abuse was captured in perfect digital clarity. Karen also didn't know my real identity or professional background. After Sophie's diagnosis, I had taken extended medical leave from my position as a federal judge to care for her full-time. I used my maiden name, Sarah Johnson, in our neighborhood to avoid unwanted attention and maintain our privacy during this incredibly difficult time. That night, after getting Sophie safely home and settled comfortably, I made some very important phone calls to my professional contacts. Within 48 hours, I had everything I needed to completely destroy Karen Henderson's perfect little world. Judge Sarah Mitchell was officially back in action, and Karen had no idea what was coming. I spent the next week gathering additional evidence. I discovered that Karen had been systematically bullying other families in the neighborhood, especially those with children who had disabilities or chronic illnesses. She had forced an elderly woman with arthritis to maintain her garden despite her physical limitations. She had threatened a family with a special needs child with constant fines for disruptive behavior. The next morning, Karen received several unexpected visitors at her pristine home. First came Child Protective Services, investigating detailed reports of systematic child abuse and endangerment. The social worker spent 3 hours carefully documenting evidence and taking photographs of everything in Karen's house. Then came the IRS agents, who had received anonymous tips about potential tax evasion and financial irregularities. During their thorough investigation, they discovered that Karen had been stealing HOA funds for years, using community money to pay for her expensive lifestyle, luxury vacations, designer clothes, and home renovations. Finally came the FBI, who were very interested in her extensive fraud charges and pattern of financial crimes that crossed multiple state lines. But I wasn't finished yet. The best part was still to come, and Karen would soon learn exactly who she had been tormenting. The weeks leading up to Karen's trial were intense. I had to balance Sophie's ongoing medical appointments with preparing the case against Karen. Other families in the neighborhood came forward with their own stories of Karen's abuse. Mrs. Chin, an elderly woman with arthritis, shared how Karen had forced her to maintain a perfect garden despite her painful condition. The Johnsons spoke about how Karen had repeatedly fined them because their autistic son sometimes made noise during his meltdowns. During the investigation, we discovered Karen's true nature. She had been running the HOA like a personal business, charging families excessive fines for minor infractions and pocketing the money. She had installed security cameras around the neighborhood without permission and used them to spy on families, looking for violations to exploit. One particularly disturbing discovery was a notebook Karen kept, filled with cruel observations about the residents. She had written detailed notes about Sophie's condition, calling her the cancer kid, and documenting her weekdays to use against us. She had pages of plans for driving out families she deemed undesirable. 2 months later, Karen Henderson stood in my federal courtroom, facing serious criminal charges that could send her to prison for decades. She was wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of her usual expensive designer clothes, and her perfectly styled hair was now messy and unkempt. Her face went completely white when she realized exactly who I was. "Your Honor," her overpriced lawyer stammered nervously, "my client was completely unaware of your prestigious position in the community." "Position doesn't matter in my courtroom," I interrupted firmly. "But actions absolutely do matter. Mrs. Henderson, you systematically abused a terminally ill child. You stole money that was meant for community improvement. You filed false police reports. Most importantly, you showed absolutely no human decency or compassion toward a suffering child." Karen's legs gave out completely and she collapsed into her chair. For the first time in her life, she truly understood that the inconvenient family she had tormented for months was about to decide her final fate. The evidence was overwhelming. Video recordings of her abuse, financial records showing years of theft, testimonies from other neighbors she had bullied. Karen's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, claiming she was just following HOA rules. "Karen Henderson," I announced clearly for the packed courtroom, "you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and child endangerment. Additionally, you will serve 3,000 hours of mandatory community service, specifically cleaning pediatric cancer wards at children's hospitals." The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Several people actually gasped at the poetic justice of the sentence. "Furthermore," I continued, "you are permanently banned from holding any HOA position anywhere in the United States. Your property will be immediately sold, and all proceeds will go toward paying restitution to the families you have harmed." Karen collapsed completely, finally understanding the full magnitude of her heartless cruelty and its consequences. The 7-year sentence sent shockwaves through similar HOA communities across the state. It became a landmark case, often cited in legal proceedings involving HOA abuse of power. After Karen's conviction, the transformation of our neighborhood was remarkable. The new HOA board, led by Dr. Martinez, a compassionate pediatrician, implemented policies focused on community support rather than punishment. They established an emergency fund to help families facing medical crises and created programs for elderly residents who needed assistance with home maintenance. The new HOA board, grateful for my service in exposing Karen's crimes and corruption, voted unanimously to use all the recovered stolen funds for something truly special. They built a beautiful playground specifically designed for children with serious illnesses, complete with wheelchair accessibility, soft surfaces, quiet areas for rest and medical equipment nearby. They named it Sophie's Garden of Hope. Sophie's Garden of Hope became more than just a playground. It became a symbol of resilience and community healing. The garden featured adaptive equipment for children with various disabilities, sensory-friendly areas for children with autism, and quiet spaces for those undergoing medical treatments. Local medical professionals volunteered their time to ensure the space was safe and beneficial for all children. Karen's imprisonment made national news, and I received letters from judges across the country thanking me for taking a stand against neighborhood bullying. Several states began reviewing their HOA regulations to prevent similar abuses of power. During her second year in prison, Karen was assigned to work in the pediatric cancer ward as part of her community service. The irony was not lost on the medical staff, who reported that she initially resisted the assignment. However, working with sick children began to change her perspective. She started to understand the pain she had caused and the strength these children showed every day. Today, Sophie is in complete remission. Her beautiful hair has grown back in gorgeous auburn curls that shine in the sunlight, and her smile is brighter and more radiant than ever before. She absolutely loves playing in her special playground, where a bronze plaque reads, "Dedicated to all the brave children who teach us what real strength and courage look like." Sophie, now 10 years old and officially in remission, occasionally visits the hospital where Karen works. Not to see Karen but to volunteer with other young patients. Sophie has become a beacon of hope for newly diagnosed children, showing them that recovery is possible and that they are not alone in their fight. 3 years after Karen's sentencing, I established the Sophie Mitchell Foundation for Childhood Cancer Support. The foundation provides legal assistance to families facing discrimination due to their children's medical conditions. We've successfully defended dozens of families against HOA abuse, landlord discrimination and school exclusion policies. Sophie, now thriving in middle school, has maintained her dream of becoming a judge. She participates in youth court programs and volunteers at legal aid clinics during school breaks. Her teachers often comment on her unusual maturity and her fierce advocacy for other students who face bullying or discrimination. Karen continues to write letters from prison, but they have changed in tone over the years. Her recent letters show genuine remorse and understanding of the harm she caused. She has requested to volunteer permanently with pediatric patients after her release, hoping to dedicate her remaining years to helping children rather than hurting them. The neighborhood has become a model community for inclusive living. Property values have actually increased since Karen's removal, as families seek out communities that prioritize compassion over conformity. The waiting list to move into Willowbrook Heights has grown significantly, with many families specifically mentioning the supportive environment as their primary reason for wanting to live there. Sophie's story has inspired changes in HOA legislation across multiple states. The Sophie's Law has been proposed in several jurisdictions, requiring HOA boards to undergo training on disability rights and child welfare before taking office. It also mandates that any complaints involving children with medical conditions be reviewed by child advocacy specialists. Sometimes people think they can abuse others without facing any consequences. They deliberately target those they perceive as weak, sick children, struggling families, anyone they believe cannot fight back against their cruelty. But they often forget that everyone has a story, everyone has connections, and everyone deserves basic human dignity. Sometimes, the person you're hurting today might be the very person deciding your fate tomorrow. Karen Henderson learned this valuable lesson exactly 7 years too late. As for Sophie and me, we learned that home isn't about perfect neighborhoods or strict rules. It's about kindness, compassion, and people who care about each other's well-being. Our experience taught us that standing up to bullies, no matter how powerful they seem, is always worth the fight. Today, Sophie's laughter fills our house every day, and that beautiful sound, combined with the positive changes in our community, represents the sweetest victory of all. Justice may sometimes take time, but when it arrives, it can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities for the better.